Olivia Donovan had never been one to seek attention. At 24, she stood barely 5'2" with lean muscles that belied her extraordinary strength. Growing up on her family's working farm in rural Montana had forged her into someone who valued results over recognition. When she stepped onto the training grounds at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California, the blazing sun reflecting off the Pacific made her squint. But it was the skeptical glances that made her stomach churn. "Look at this one." She heard someone whisper behind her. Did they lower the physical requirements or something? Olivia kept her eyes forward as she joined the group of trainees shuffling toward the assembly area. She had dreamed of this moment since she was 14, watching her older sister Ellie return from deployment with stories of lives saved that made Olivia's eyes shine with determination. But Ellie had been 5'9" and built like an athlete. Olivia looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The instructors began their infamous welcome, barking orders that echoed across the sun-drenched California coastline. Olivia moved with precision, muscle memory from years of early farm mornings, keeping her alert despite the intimidating atmosphere. She had been up before dawn most of her life. This was just louder. "Listen up, recruits." "Lieutenant Commander." Jackson Reeves' voice cut through the noise like a blade. Reeves was a legend at the Special Operations Combat Medic Training Program. A 15-year veteran with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for breaking the overconfident ones. "You think you're tough? You think you're ready? I've seen Girl Scouts with more potential than half of you." As the instructors separated the trainees into groups, Olivia found herself assigned to Echo Squad under Reeves' command. The other trainees in her group were mostly young men who looked like they'd stepped out of a recruitment poster, tall, broad-shouldered, confident. Then there was Olivia, quietly checking her gear and trying to blend into the background. "Donovan." Reeves' voice made Olivia's spine snap straight. The instructor approached, circling her like a predator sizing up prey. "What's your story?" "Recruit, you look like you got lost on your way to a high school volleyball game." "No, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Reeves leaned closer, close enough that Olivia could see the skepticism in his eyes. "We'll see about that. This isn't summer camp, little girl. This is where we make combat medics. Real medics who can save lives under fire." As the trainees were herded toward their quarters for their first night, Olivia caught fragments of whispered conversations around her. The consensus was clear. She wouldn't last a week. Olivia unpacked her few belongings in silence, placing one photo of her family on her footlocker, her father in his army dress uniform from Desert Storm stood proudly beside her mother and sisters. Tomorrow the real test would begin. The 4:30 wake-up call came like a thunderclap. But Olivia was already awake. Farm life had trained her to rise before dawn, and anxiety had kept her alert through most of the night. Around her, other trainees stumbled from their bunks, cursing and fumbling for their uniforms. "Move, move, move!" "Lieutenant Commander." Reeves burst through the barracks like a hurricane. "You've got exactly 3 minutes to get your sorry selves in formation." Olivia was dressed and standing at attention beside her bunk in under 2 minutes, watching as her fellow trainees struggled with bootlaces and belt buckles. Reeves noticed too. Well, look who's eager to play medic." Reeves stopped directly in front of Olivia, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "Tell me, Donovan, what makes you think you belong here with the real operators?" "I want to save lives, sir," Olivia replied, staring straight ahead. "Save lives?" Reeves' laugh was cold. "You'll need to drag wounded warriors twice your size out of combat zones. Can you do that, Donovan? Can your tiny arms carry a 220-pound SEAL across a battlefield while bullets fly around you?" Olivia felt heat creep up her neck but kept her voice level. "I'll do whatever it takes, sir. We'll see." The first week blurred together in a haze of push-ups, running, and constant screaming. Olivia struggled with some of the physical challenges. She finished in the middle of the pack on most runs, needed more effort on the higher obstacles, and could barely complete the minimum pull-ups required. But she never quit, never complained, and never asked for special treatment. It was during the medical training simulations that Reeves' particular attention became clear. While other trainees made mistakes and received standard correction, Olivia's errors earned extended criticism. "Donovan, your tourniquet application is garbage. Drop and give me 20. Donovan, you're holding up the entire squad." Everyone. "Thank Donovan for your extra PT. Donovan, what are you even doing here? This isn't a place for little girls playing doctor." The other trainees began to notice. Some looked at Olivia with pity, others with growing resentment as her punishment. Details affected the entire squad. A few started avoiding her altogether, not wanting to be associated with the trainee who couldn't keep up. But it was during their first combat extraction drill that something shifted. Olivia had grown up hauling hay bales, wrestling calves for branding, and carrying injured lambs across fields. The farm had given her a different kind of strength, not the showy muscles of a bodybuilder, but the functional power of someone who worked with their hands every day. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When the instructors called for trainees to demonstrate casualty evacuation techniques, Olivia approached the 180-pound dummy with practiced efficiency. Using proper leverage and body mechanics, she hoisted the dummy onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry and moved steadily through the obstacle course without hesitation. The talent emerges. Word traveled fast through the squad about Olivia's surprising strength. By evening chow, trainees who had barely acknowledged her existence were suddenly curious about the quiet girl from Montana. "Yo, Donovan," called Mark Davidson, a former college football player from Ohio. "Where'd you learn to lift like that?" Olivia looked up from her tray of pasta and vegetables. "My family's farm. Been lifting calves in hay bales since I was 8. No kidding. My dad took me to the gym since high school, but I've never seen someone your size move weight like that. You made it look easy." Before Olivia could respond, Lieutenant Commander Reeves appeared behind her. "Davidson, you've got something better to do than chat with Donovan." "No, sir. I don't care what you were just doing. Finish your chow and prepare for evening inspection." Reeves' eyes lingered on Olivia with an expression that had shifted from dismissive to something harder to read. Olivia went back to eating, but she could feel the instructor's gaze burning into the back of her head. The next morning brought the water confidence course, Olivia's consistent weakness. The rope traverse in particular had become her nemesis. While other trainees crossed the 30-foot water pit with relative ease, Olivia struggled to maintain her grip halfway through before her arms gave out. "Donovan!" Reeves' voice echoed across the training area. "What are you doing up there, taking a nap?" Olivia hung from the rope, arms shaking with exhaustion, sweat stinging her eyes. Below, she could see her fellow trainees watching with a mixture of embarrassment and impatience. "I can't make it, sir," Olivia gasped, the admission burning in her throat. "Can't?" Reeves' voice rose to a shout. "There is no can't in my program. You will cross that rope, or you will hang there until you pass out." Olivia closed her eyes, thought of her father's weathered hands teaching her to lift with her legs, to never give up, to always find another way. She began moving again, inch by painful inch, until finally her hands slapped the platform on the other side. But the victory was short-lived. That afternoon brought another casualty evacuation drill, and Olivia's performance was even better than before. She was moving heavier dummies with greater efficiency than trainees who outweighed her by 80 pounds, using technique and leverage that had the safety officers taking notice. "Donovan," called Chief Petty Officer Martinez, the senior medical instructor. "Step over here." Olivia approached, expecting another lecture about her performance on the rope traverse. Instead, Martinez nodded toward two dummies positioned side by side. "Let's see what you can do with both of these." Olivia assessed the situation, adjusting her approach for the increased weight. She used a modified technique she'd developed for carrying twin lambs on the farm, distributing the weight across her core rather than her shoulders. With careful movements, she lifted both dummies' combined weight over 300 pounds and carried them 15 yards before setting them down. With controlled precision, a murmur went through the other instructors. Martinez nodded slowly. "Do it again." Olivia did, and again. 3 attempts, 3 successful extractions with weight that challenged experienced operators. Lieutenant Commander Reeves watched from a distance, his jaw tight. That evening, he called Olivia aside after lights out. "You think you're special now, Donovan?" Reeves' voice was quiet, more dangerous than his usual shouting. "Think that little lifting exhibition makes you a combat medic? No, sir. You're right, it doesn't. Being a combat medic is about more than hauling bodies. It's about making split-second decisions under fire, performing complex medical procedures with minimal equipment, leadership under pressure, things you obviously lack." Olivia said nothing, but something in Reeves' tone suggested this conversation was far from over. 3 weeks into training, Olivia had settled into an uncomfortable routine. She excelled at casualty evacuation, consistently outperforming every other trainee in her squad when it came to moving wounded. Her medical knowledge scores were near perfect, and she'd moved up to finishing in the top third during runs. But Lieutenant Commander Reeves' attention had only intensified. "Donovan, your medical kit is a disaster. Reorganize it and report to me in 10 minutes. Olivia would check her kit, perfectly arranged according to regulations, then spend 30 minutes reorganizing it to impossible standards while Reeves watched with cold satisfaction. "Donovan, your uniform is wrinkled. Iron it again and report for inspection." The uniform would be flawless, but Reeves would find microscopic flaws that required Olivia to start over, often making her late for other training and earning her additional punishment. It was during the combat trauma assessment test that things came to a head. Olivia had been steadily improving, her farm-hardened determination compensating for her smaller stature. She'd aced the written portion, completed the practical skills assessment with high marks, and was working on the stress shooting course when disaster struck. The exercise required trainees to engage targets while simultaneously assessing and treating simulated casualties. Olivia was making good time when she heard Reeves' voice cutting through the training noise. "Donovan, what are you doing? You're supposed to be treating the patient, not daydreaming." Olivia was treating the patient correctly, but she increased her pace anyway. In her hurry, her medical shears slipped from her vest pocket, falling onto the ground where another trainee tripped over them, sending a cascade of equipment clattering across the training area. "Donovan!" Reeves' scream could be heard across the entire compound. "You just compromised your entire team. Everyone hit the deck. Push-ups until I get tired." As the squad groaned and began their punishment push-ups, Olivia felt 30 pairs of eyes boring into her with undisguised resentment. She had cost them, again. That evening, Mark Davidson confronted her in the barracks. "What's your deal, Donovan? It's like you're trying to make us all look bad." "I'm not trying to do anything except graduate," Olivia replied quietly. "Well, maybe you should try harder, or maybe you should consider if this is really the right place for you." The words stung because Olivia had been wondering the same thing. She was good, exceptional even, at certain aspects of combat medic training. But Reeves seemed determined to highlight every weakness, every failure, every moment where Olivia's size or strength put her at a disadvantage. Late that night, Olivia stared at the photo of her family and wondered if she was fooling herself. Maybe Reeves was right. Maybe wanting something badly enough wasn't the same as being capable of achieving it. But then she remembered the feel of the weight on her shoulders during the extraction drills, the perfect balance she found when carrying loads that men twice her size struggled with. She thought about her father's stories from Desert Storm, of medics who came in all sizes, but shared the same unbreakable commitment to saving lives. Olivia made a decision. She would not quit. Whatever Reeves threw at her, whatever obstacles she faced, she would find a way to overcome them. And if that meant proving herself in the one area where she excelled beyond question, then that's exactly what she would do. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. The announcement came during morning formation. A special joint training exercise would be held in 1 week. Navy SEALs would participate in a simulated combat scenario, and the top-performing combat medic trainees would provide medical support and extraction. The trainees selected would be evaluated for potential fast-tracking to advanced medical training and special operations assignments. Olivia felt her pulse quicken. This was it, her chance to prove that she belonged here, that her struggles with rope traverses and obstacle courses didn't define her worth as a combat medic. Lieutenant Commander Reeves noticed Olivia's reaction immediately. "Don't get your hopes up, Donovan," Reeves said after dismissing the formation. "This exercise is for combat medics, not little girls with party tricks. I'd like to participate." "Sir," Olivia replied. Reeves' smile was cold. "Oh, you'll participate. But when you embarrass yourself in this training unit, don't say I didn't warn you." The other trainees had mixed reactions. Mark Davidson seemed genuinely concerned, remembering Olivia's performance during the extraction drills. "Look, Donovan," said Brian Reynolds, a former Marine from Virginia, "no offense, but this is going to be the real deal. SEALs don't play around. They're going to be depending on us to get them out if things go sideways." "I understand," Olivia said simply. What they didn't understand was that Olivia had been training for this moment since she was 14 years old. County fair strength competitions, junior lifeguard contests, volunteer work with the local fire department's rescue team. She'd been preparing long before she ever thought about becoming a combat medic. The training intensified over the next week. Olivia spent every available moment in the medical simulation lab, working with Chief Martinez to fine-tune her techniques. Martinez, initially skeptical of Reeves' diminutive trainee, had become increasingly impressed with Olivia's natural ability and mechanical efficiency. "You've got something special, Donovan," Martinez told her after a particularly good session. "Question is, can you handle the pressure when it counts?" Olivia's answer came the day before the joint exercise. Reeves had been riding her harder than usual, finding faults with everything from her medical documentation to her posture during briefings. After evening chow, Reeves cornered Olivia outside the mess hall. "I've been thinking about this exercise tomorrow," Reeves said, his voice deceptively casual. "Maybe it's not such a good idea for you to participate." Olivia felt her stomach drop. "Sir, you've been struggling with so many aspects of training. Maybe it would be better for the unit if someone more well-rounded represented us. I've qualified for the exercise. My medical scores. Your scores are meaningless if you can't handle the pressure. What if you freeze? What if you embarrass not just yourself, but me and this entire training program?" Olivia met Reeves' gaze steadily. "I won't freeze, sir." "How can you be so sure? Because this is what I do. This is who I am." Reeves studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fine, but understand this, Donovan. If you fail tomorrow, if you make me look like a fool for letting you participate, there will be consequences. Your training here will become very, very difficult." Olivia almost laughed. Training was already nearly impossible. Reeves' threats had lost their power over her. "I understand, sir. I won't let you down." As Olivia walked back to the barracks, she realized something had changed. For the first time since arriving at Coronado, she wasn't afraid of Reeves or his threats. Tomorrow she would participate on her own terms, in her element, and let her actions do the talking. The quiet farm girl was about to remind everyone why they should never underestimate someone who had learned to carry burdens others couldn't. Even lift. The joint exercise day dawned hot and humid, with conditions that would challenge even experienced operators. Olivia woke before reveille, her stomach tight with nervous energy but her mind clear. She had dreamed of her father the night before. Not the aging veteran with the bad knee who still worked their Montana farm, but the young Army medic who'd earned commendations for saving lives in the Persian Gulf. The exercise would be held at the remote training facility designed to simulate combat conditions with realistic terrain, buildings, and obstacles. Representatives from all 4 training squads would participate alongside a SEAL team preparing for deployment. Olivia had watched some of the other combat medic trainees during regular training. They were good, some of them very good. Most were bigger, stronger, and more confident than she was. But none of them had grown up hauling 100-pound feed bags uphill in Montana snowstorms. Lieutenant Commander Reeves gathered Eco Squad's participants, Olivia and Mark Davidson, who'd earned the second slot with consistently solid performance across all training metrics. "Remember," Reeves told them, his eyes fixed on Olivia, "you are representing this training unit and me. Don't make me regret this decision." The exercise format was straightforward. A SEAL team would conduct a building clearance operation. Combat medic trainees would be stationed at various positions, ready to respond to simulated casualties. The scenarios would escalate in difficulty and realism, culminating in a mass casualty event requiring extraction under simulated enemy fire. Olivia checked her medical kit methodically, the same gear she'd been training with for weeks. She'd requested permission to modify her carrying system the day before, adapting the standard issue harness to better distribute weight across her core rather than her shoulders. The modification, inspired by the way she carried loads on the farm, had been approved by Chief Martinez after Olivia demonstrated its effectiveness. The first phase began with minimal ceremony. 20 trainees took positions around the training compound, waiting for the exercise to commence. 4 SEAL operators entered the main building, moving with the practiced efficiency that came from years of high-risk operations. "Exercise begins in 3, 2, 1. Execute," came the command over the radio. Olivia settled into her position, feeling the familiar calm that always preceded her best performance. She blocked out the other trainees, the watching instructors, even Lieutenant Commander Reeves' burning gaze. There was only the mission, the potential casualties, and the steady rhythm of her breathing. The first casualty call came within minutes. "Medic, Building Alpha, 2nd floor, room 3. Olivia moved immediately, her gear secured tightly to prevent noise. She navigated the stairs with practiced ease, finding the simulated casualty, a 190-pound SEAL operator with a mock gunshot wound to the leg. "Assessment?" demanded the exercise controller. "Gunshot wound, femoral bleeding, patient conscious, but showing signs of shock," Olivia reported, her hands already applying a tourniquet with precise movements. "Treatment plan?" "Secure airway, control bleeding with pressure and tourniquet, establish IV access, administer fluids and pain management. Prepare for immediate evacuation," the controller nodded. "Proceed with evacuation." Olivia secured her medical gear, then positioned herself to lift the SEAL. Using the technique she'd perfected during training, she hoisted him onto her shoulders in one fluid motion. The operator, despite playing the role of an injured SEAL, couldn't hide his surprise as the small-framed medic carried him down the stairs and out to the designated collection point without hesitation. "Extraction complete," Olivia reported, lowering her patient carefully onto the treatment tarp. "Time," called the controller. 4 minutes, 12 seconds, new course record. Mark Davidson whistled low, "Damn, Donovan, where'd that come from?" Olivia said nothing, but she caught Lieutenant Commander Reeves' expression from the corner of her eye. The instructor looked surprised, almost unsettled. Phase 2 began immediately. The scenarios grew more complex, with multiple casualties and more challenging extractions. Olivia moved through each one with mechanical precision, her farm-forged strength and instinctive understanding of leverage allowing her to move casualties that trainees 50 pounds heavier struggled with. "Looking good, Donovan," Chief Martinez murmured as he passed behind the staging area. "Keep it up." The final phase was where legends were made or destroyed. A simulated explosion in the main building would create 5 casualties. SEAL operators wearing specialized training suits that mimicked real injuries. The combat medics would need to triage, treat, and extract all casualties under simulated enemy fire while navigating obstacles and maintaining cover. Only 8 trainees remained for this phase, and the pressure was palpable. Olivia was the smallest competitor by far, the only woman, and still the trainee most people expected to crack under pressure. As she prepared her equipment for the final scenario, she heard whispered conversations from the gallery of watching instructors and trainees. "She's been lucky so far, but this is where it gets real. 5 casualties? No way she can handle that many. $20 says she calls for help after the second one." Olivia tuned them out. For the final phase, there was no room for anything but absolute focus. She studied the building layout one last time, mentally mapping the fastest extraction routes and identifying potential choke points. She made final adjustments to her harness system and settled into her starting position. The explosion rocked the training compound, sending a plume of smoke rising from the main building. Immediately, the radio crackled to life. "Multiple casualties, Building Bravo, floors 1 and 2. Medical teams move now." Olivia sprinted toward the building, adrenaline focusing her mind to laser precision. The first casualty was just inside the entrance, a SEAL with simulated chest wounds and a broken leg. "Patient 1, tension pneumothorax and compound femur fracture," Olivia reported, her hands moving in practiced patterns. "Stabilizing for transport." She performed the necessary medical interventions, then secured the 210-pound operator across her shoulders. Using the building wall for initial leverage, she stood with a fluid motion that belied the weight on her frame. "Taking patient 1 to collection point Alpha," she reported, moving steadily despite the load. After depositing the first casualty, she immediately returned for the next. The second SEAL was on the stairwell, a simulated head wound making him a critical evacuation priority. Olivia treated and extracted him with the same methodical efficiency, though sweat now soaked her uniform and her breathing had become more labored. By the third casualty, a 225-pound operator with mock shrapnel wounds on the second floor, Olivia's muscles were screaming in protest. But she pushed through, using every technique she'd learned on the farm and during training to manage the increasing fatigue. The fourth extraction was nearly her breaking point. The SEAL was positioned in a narrow hallway with limited maneuvering room, and simulated enemy fire meant she had to maintain a crouched position during the initial treatment. By the time she reached the collection point with him, her legs were shaking from exertion. "Last casualty, rooftop," came the call over the radio. "Critical condition, needs immediate extraction." Olivia looked up at the 3-story building, then back at her trembling hands. She had already moved over 800 pounds of human weight through a combat zone. No one would blame her for calling for assistance on this final extraction. No one except herself. She took 3 deep breaths, strapped her medical kit tighter to her body, and began the climb to the rooftop. Each step felt like moving through molasses, her muscles protesting every movement. But something beyond physical strength kept her going, the same stubborn determination that had brought her to this training in the first place. The final seal was positioned near the edge of the roof, a simulated sucking chest wound and severed brachial artery, making him the most critical patient yet. Olivia performed the necessary treatments with hands that somehow remained steady despite her exhaustion. Extraction route? Asked the rooftop controller. Olivia assessed her options. The stairs would be the safest but slowest route. The external fire escape would be faster, but more exposed to simulated enemy fire. Main stairwell, she decided. I'll need to maintain pressure on the chest seal during movement. The controller nodded. Proceed. Olivia positioned herself beneath the 215-pound operator, using a modified fireman's carry that would allow her to maintain pressure on his chest wound during transport. With a grunt of effort that came from somewhere beyond her conscious control, she stood. The journey down 3 flights of stairs with over 200 pounds of dead weight was the hardest physical challenge Olivia had ever faced. Each step required absolute focus to prevent a fall that would injure both her and her patient. Halfway down, her vision began to narrow, her body approaching its physical limits. Keep going, Donovan, she whispered to herself. One more step. Just one more. When she finally emerged from the building, the watching crowd had gone completely silent. Olivia's uniform was soaked with sweat, her face pale with exertion, but her posture remained erect as she carried her final patient to the collection point. As she lowered the seal to the treatment tarp, her legs finally gave out, and she dropped to one knee beside him. Extraction complete, she reported, her voice barely above a whisper. All 5 patients delivered. The silence stretched for what felt like hours before someone in the gallery began clapping. Then others joined in, and soon the applause was thunderous. Lieutenant Commander Reeves walked over to where Olivia was still kneeling, trying to catch her breath. Donovan, Reeves said, his voice carrying none of its usual edge. Stand up. Olivia forced herself to her feet, swaying slightly with exhaustion. Reeves extended his hand. Outstanding work, medic. Medic, not trainee, not little girl. Medic. Olivia shook her instructor's hand, feeling the calluses earned through 15 years of service, and realized that something fundamental had changed between them. Thank you, sir. The joint exercise results were announced 2 days later. Olivia had set records in casualty extraction time and total weight moved during the final scenario. Her performance had earned her an immediate recommendation to Advanced Tactical Medical School, a pathway that would eventually lead her to deployment with special operations teams around the world. Later that afternoon, during the initial physical assessment, Olivia observed the trainees as they rotated through various stations. The small female trainee Ramirez, according to her file, was struggling with the pull-up bar, her face flushed with effort as she attempted to complete the minimum requirement. Ramirez, Olivia called, approaching the station. A word. The young woman dropped from the bar, her expression a mixture of frustration and resignation as she reported to Olivia. She clearly expected criticism or dismissal. You're having trouble with the upper body exercises, Olivia observed. Yes, Senior Chief. I'm working on it. What's your background? Competitive swimming, Senior Chief. Distance events. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. Different muscle groups, different strengths. Let me ask you something, Ramirez. Why are you here? I want to save lives, Senior Chief. There are easier ways to do that. Become a nurse. Work in an emergency room. Why this program? Ramirez hesitated, then straightened her posture. Because I want to be where it matters most. Where others can't or won't go. The echo of Olivia's own motivation from years earlier wasn't lost on her. You're going to hear a lot of people tell you that you're too small for this job. That you'll never be able to carry a wounded operator to safety. I know, Senior Chief. They're wrong. Surprise flickered across Ramirez's face. But knowing they're wrong isn't enough, Olivia continued. You have to prove it to them, but more importantly, to yourself. it won't be easy. In fact, it will be the hardest thing you've ever done. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Senior Chief. Olivia studied the young trainee for a moment longer, then nodded toward the pull-up bar. 5 more. Then we'll work on technique. As she watched Ramirez return to the bar with renewed determination, Olivia reflected on her own journey from doubted trainee to respected operator. The path hadn't been easy, and it wouldn't be easy for Ramirez either. But difficulty wasn't the same as impossibility. That evening, Olivia received a call from Lieutenant Commander Jackson Reeves, now Captain Reeves, calling from his Pentagon office. Donovan, his familiar voice brought an unexpected smile to her face. Heard you're terrorizing trainees now. Learning from the best, sir, Reeves chuckled. How's the new batch looking? Mixed. Some promising candidates, some who think they already know everything. Anyone remind you of yourself? Olivia thought of Ramirez, struggling at the pull-up bar but refusing to give up. Maybe one. Push her hard, Donovan. Not because you want to break her, but because you need to know she won't break when it matters. I intend to, sir. Good. There was a pause before Reeves continued. The program's lucky to have you, Donovan. Not many instructors have your practical experience or your perspective. Meaning not many instructors have carried 5 SEALs to an extraction point. Meaning not many instructors understand what it's like to have everyone doubt you from the moment you walk in the door. That's a perspective these trainees need, especially the ones who don't fit the conventional mold. After ending the call, Olivia sat at her desk reviewing training files. Ramirez's photo stared back at her, young, determined, underestimated. The parallels weren't lost on Olivia, but she knew better than to go easy on the trainee because of them. If anything, she would push Ramirez harder, testing her limits to discover her true capabilities. Because that was the lesson Olivia had learned through years of proving herself. True potential wasn't measured by how you performed when things were easy, but by what you could accomplish when failure seemed inevitable. The next 6 months of training tested every trainee to their limits, but none more so than Ramirez. Olivia designed specialized extraction drills that played to the young woman's core strength while simultaneously developing her weaker areas. Where Reeves had used primarily criticism to motivate Olivia, she employed a more balanced approach with Ramirez, pushing her relentlessly, but also acknowledging her progress. Your technique has improved, Olivia noted after watching Ramirez complete a casualty extraction drill. You're using leverage more effectively now. Thank you, Senior Chief. Still too slow on the initial lift. 5 more repetitions. Ramirez nodded and returned to the training dummy without complaint. The transformation was gradual, but unmistakable. By the 4th month, Ramirez was outperforming trainees twice her size in casualty extraction drills, using techniques adapted to her specific body mechanics and strengths. Her upper body strength had improved dramatically, and while she might never match the raw power of some of her male counterparts, she had developed something equally valuable: flawless technique and unshakable endurance. The final qualification exercise came in month 6, a grueling scenario that simulated a combat extraction under extreme conditions. Each trainee would be evaluated on their ability to assess, treat, and extract multiple casualties from a hostile environment while maintaining their own operational security. As Olivia observed from the control tower, she watched Ramirez move through the course with practiced efficiency, her small frame navigating obstacles that larger trainees struggled with. When it came time for the extraction phase, Ramirez employed the modified techniques Olivia had helped her develop, moving casualties that outweighed her by over 100 pounds, with surprising speed and stability. Impressive, remarked Captain Miller, the program director who had joined Olivia in the observation post. When she first arrived, I had my doubts. Most people did. You didn't. Olivia watched as Ramirez completed her final extraction well under the time limit. I saw something familiar. "I've reviewed your file, Donovan," Miller said, his tone conversational. "That incident in Syria, 5 operators extracted across 800 meters of hostile terrain. The reports called it extraordinary. I was just doing my job, sir. That's what makes it extraordinary. You didn't see it as impossible, so it wasn't." Miller nodded toward Ramirez, who was now receiving her final evaluation. "That's what you've given her. Not just techniques or strength, but the belief that limitations are largely self-imposed or accepted from others." After the final evaluations were complete, Olivia gathered the graduating trainees for one last address before they received their assignments. "When you joined this program, I told you that we don't measure capability by height, weight, or gender," she began, looking at each face in turn. "We measure it by results. You've all proven yourselves capable of achieving those results, each in your own way. But the real test is still ahead of you." Olivia moved closer to the formation, her voice dropping slightly so the trainees had to focus to hear her words. "In the field, no one will care how many pull-ups you can do or how fast you can run a mile. They'll care about one thing only. Can you save lives when everything is falling apart around you? Can you be the calm in the chaos? Can you do what others think is impossible because you refuse to accept artificial limitations?" Her eyes found Ramirez in the formation. "Some of you will face doubts from others based solely on your appearance. Some will be underestimated because you don't fit someone's idea of what an operator should look like. When that happens, remember this: being underestimated isn't a disadvantage unless you believe it is. In fact, it can be your greatest tactical advantage." That evening, after the graduation ceremony, Ramirez approached Olivia as she was gathering her materials. "Senior Chief, I wanted to thank you before I ship out." "For what, Ramirez?" "For pushing me, for not letting me make excuses, for showing me what's possible." Olivia regarded the young medic thoughtfully. "I didn't show you what's possible, Ramirez. I just refused to accept that it was impossible." "There's a difference." "Yes, Senior Chief." Ramirez hesitated, then asked the question Olivia had been expecting since day one. "Is it true what they say about Syria? About you carrying 5 SEALs to extraction by yourself? Does it matter?" "I guess not, but it helps to know it can be done." Olivia smiled slightly. "Then yes, it's true. Not because I'm exceptional, but because I refuse to accept the alternative. Remember that when you're facing your own impossible situation." As Ramirez left to join her classmates for their graduation celebration, Olivia remained behind, thinking about her own journey from doubted trainee to instructor. The story of what she had done in Syria had taken on almost mythical proportions within certain circles of the special operations community. Some versions had her carrying all 5 operators simultaneously. Others claimed she had done it under constant enemy fire for 2 kilometers instead of 800 meters. The reality had been less dramatic but no less remarkable: a small-framed medic doing what needed to be done because there was no one else to do it. No superhuman strength, just determination and proper technique combined with a refusal to accept failure as an option. Later that night, Olivia received another call from Captain Reeves. "Heard your class graduated today," he said without preamble. "Anyone exceptional? They all met the standard." "That's not what I asked, Donovan." Olivia thought of Ramirez, of the transformation she had witnessed over 6 months of training. "One shows particular promise. Similar background to mine. Small package, big capabilities, something like that." "Good." Reeves paused. "The program needs more instructors with your perspective, Donovan. Thinking about making the teaching position permanent." Olivia had been considering this question herself. Her time as an operator had been fulfilling in many ways, but there was something equally rewarding about watching trainees like Ramirez discover their own capabilities under her guidance. "Still deciding, sir." "Well, for what it's worth, I think you've found your calling. We have plenty of operators, but not many who can truly teach others to exceed their perceived limitations. Reeves cleared his throat. You've become quite the legend, you know. That story from Syria gets more elaborate every time I hear it. Most legends are exaggerated, sir. Maybe, but they serve a purpose. That story, your story, has inspired a whole new generation of medics who don't fit the traditional mold. Sometimes a legend that shows what's possible is more valuable than 100 realistic training scenarios. After ending the call, Olivia stood at her office window, looking out over the training grounds, now empty in the evening light. She thought about Ramirez and the other trainees she had shepherded through the program. She thought about Lieutenant Commander Reeves and how his brutal methods had forged her into someone who refused to accept limitations. And she thought about those 5 extractions in Syria, each one more difficult than the last, but each one proof of what could be accomplished when necessity overcame doubt. The official report from that day in Syria had been clinical in its assessment. Senior Medic Donovan, demonstrating exceptional technical skill and physical capability, successfully extracted 5 injured operators across challenging terrain, while under sporadic enemy fire, ensuring all personnel reached medical evacuation within the critical golden hour. What the report couldn't capture was the moment when Olivia, exhausted beyond anything she had experienced before, had lifted the 5th and final seal onto her shoulders. In that moment, with her muscles screaming and her lungs burning, she had heard Lieutenant Commander Reeves' voice in her head. Can you do that, Donovan? Can your tiny arms carry a wounded warrior to safety? And she had answered, not with words, but with actions that spoke louder than any argument ever could. Some battles are won with overwhelming force. Others are won with perfect technique, unwavering determination, and a refusal to accept defeat one extraction at a time. The final qualification exercise came in month 6, a grueling scenario that simulated a combat extraction under extreme conditions. Each trainee would be evaluated on their ability to assess, treat, and extract multiple casualties from a hostile environment while maintaining their own operational security. As Olivia observed from the control tower, she watched Ramirez move through the course with practiced efficiency, her small frame navigating obstacles that larger trainees struggled with. When it came time for the extraction phase, Ramirez employed the modified techniques Olivia had helped her develop, moving casualties that outweighed her by over 100 pounds with surprising speed and stability. Impressive, remarked Captain Miller, the program director who had joined Olivia in the observation post. When she first arrived, I had my doubts. Most people did. You didn't. Olivia watched as Ramirez completed her final extraction, well under the time limit. I saw something familiar. I've reviewed your file, Donovan, Miller said, his tone conversational. That incident in Syria, 5 operators extracted across 800 meters of hostile terrain. The reports called it extraordinary. I was just doing my job, sir. That's what makes it extraordinary. You didn't see it as impossible, so it wasn't. Miller nodded toward Ramirez, who's now receiving her final evaluation. That's what you've given her. Not just techniques or strength, but the belief that limitations are largely self-imposed or accepted from others. After the final evaluations were complete, Olivia gathered the graduating trainees for one last address before they received their assignments. When you joined this program, I told you that we don't measure capability by height, weight, or gender, she began, looking at each face in turn. We measure it by results. You've all proven yourselves capable of achieving those results, each in your own way, but the real test is still ahead of you. Olivia moved closer to the formation, her voice dropping slightly so the trainees had to focus to hear her words. In the field, no one will care how many pull-ups you can do or how fast you can run a mile. They'll care about one thing only. Can you save lives when everything is falling apart around you? Can you be the calm in the chaos? Can you do what others think is impossible because you refuse to accept artificial limitations? Her eyes found Ramirez in the formation. Some of you will face doubts from others based solely on your appearance. Some will be underestimated because you don't fit someone's idea of what an operator should look like. When that happens, remember this: being underestimated isn't a disadvantage unless you believe it is. In fact, it can be your greatest tactical advantage. That evening, after the graduation ceremony, Ramirez approached Olivia as she was gathering her materials. "Senior, Chief, I wanted to thank you before I ship out." "For what, Ramirez?" "For pushing me. For not letting me make excuses. For showing me what's possible." Olivia regarded the young medic thoughtfully. "I didn't show you what's possible, Ramirez. I just refused to accept that it was impossible. There's a difference." "Yes, Senior." "Chief." Ramirez hesitated, then asked the question Olivia had been expecting since day one. "Is it true what they say? About Syria? About you carrying 5 SEALs to extraction by yourself? Does it matter? I guess not, but it helps to know it can be done." Olivia smiled slightly. "Then yes, it's true. Not because I'm exceptional, but because I refuse to accept the alternative. Remember that when you're facing your own impossible situation." As Ramirez left to join her classmates for their graduation celebration, Olivia remained behind, thinking about her own journey from doubted trainee to instructor. The story of what she had done in Syria had taken on almost mythical proportions within certain circles of the special operations community. Some versions had her carrying all 5 operators simultaneously. Others claimed she had done it under constant enemy fire for 2 kilometers instead of 800 meters. The reality had been less dramatic but no less remarkable: a small-framed medic doing what needed to be done because there was no one else to do it. No superhuman strength, just determination and proper technique, combined with a refusal to accept failure as an option. Later that night, Olivia received another call from Captain Reeves. "Heard your class graduated today," he said without preamble. "Anyone exceptional? They all met the standard." "That's not what I asked, Donovan." Olivia thought of Ramirez, of the transformation she had witnessed over 6 months of training. "One shows particular promise, similar background to mine. Small package, big capabilities, something like that." "Good." Reeves paused. "The program needs more instructors with your perspective, Donovan. Thinking about making the teaching position permanent?" Olivia had been considering this question herself. Her time as an operator had been fulfilling in many ways, but there was something equally rewarding about watching trainees like Ramirez discover their own capabilities under her guidance. "Still deciding, sir." "Well, for what it's worth, I think you've found your calling. We have plenty of operators, but not many who can truly teach others to exceed their perceived limitations." Reeves cleared his throat. "You've become quite the legend, you know. That story from Syria gets more elaborate every time I hear it." "Most legends are exaggerated, sir." "Maybe, but they serve a purpose. That story, your story, has inspired a whole new generation of medics who don't fit the traditional mold. Sometimes a legend that shows what's possible is more valuable than 100 realistic training scenarios." After ending the call, Olivia stood at her office window, looking out over the training grounds, now empty in the evening light. She thought about Ramirez and the other trainees she had shepherded through the program. She thought about Lieutenant Commander Reeves and how his brutal methods had forged her into someone who refused to accept limitations. And she thought about those 5 extractions in Syria, each one more difficult than the last, but each one proof of what could be accomplished when necessity overcame doubt. The official report from that day in Syria had been clinical in its assessment. Senior Medic Donovan, demonstrating exceptional technical skill and physical capability, successfully extracted 5 injured operators across challenging terrain, while under sporadic enemy fire, ensuring all personnel reached medical evacuation within the critical golden hour. What the report couldn't capture was the moment when Olivia, exhausted beyond anything she had experienced before, had lifted the fifth and final seal onto her shoulders. In that moment, with her muscles screaming and her lungs burning, she had heard Lieutenant Commander Reeves' voice in her head. "Can you do that, Donovan? Can your tiny arms carry a wounded warrior to safety?" And she had answered, not with words, but with actions that spoke louder than any argument ever could. Some battles are won with overwhelming force. Others are won with perfect technique, unwavering determination, and a refusal to accept defeat one extraction at a time. 2 years into her role as an instructor, Olivia received orders that would once again test everything she believed about herself and the standards she had helped establish. A classified operation required her specific expertise, not just her medical knowledge, but her proven ability to extract casualties under impossible conditions. The briefing was conducted in a secure room deep within the Pentagon, with only 5 people present. Captain Reeves, now serving as Deputy Director of Special Operations; General Matthews, Head of Joint Special Operations Command; Dr. Eleanor Winters, a specialist in combat medicine; Commander Wilson from Naval Special Warfare; and Olivia herself. "We have a situation," General Matthews began, his voice grave, as he activated a secure display showing satellite imagery of a mountainous region. 3 days ago, a joint task force was compromised. During an intelligence-gathering operation in the Hindu Kush, 6 operators are currently sheltering in a cave system at 14,000 feet elevation. 2 are critically wounded, 3 have moderate injuries, and 1 remains combat effective. Olivia studied the terrain displayed on the screen: steep, rocky, with narrow paths winding between sheer cliffs and deep ravines. Even for experienced mountaineers, this would be challenging terrain. For someone carrying wounded personnel, it approached the impossible. "Extraction options?" she asked. Captain Reeves took over. "Limited. The cave system is located in a narrow valley with no viable landing zones for helicopters. The closest we can get air support is here." He indicated a point on the map nearly 2 kilometers from the operator's position. "The injured personnel will need to be moved to this extraction point on foot." Weather conditions? Olivia was already mentally calculating what would be required. "Deteriorating," Dr. Winters replied, pulling up a meteorological forecast. "A storm system is moving in. We have a 36-hour window before conditions become unsurvivable at that elevation." "Why me?" Olivia asked the question everyone in the room was thinking. "You have entire QRF teams for situations like this." General Matthews and Captain Reeves exchanged glances before Matthews responded. "The terrain and weather conditions make this particularly challenging. The path to extraction is extremely narrow in places, less than 2 feet wide, with 1,000-foot drops on either side. A larger team would move too slowly and be more vulnerable to detection." He paused. "We need someone who can move efficiently through confined spaces while carrying heavy loads. Someone with proven capabilities in extreme casualty extraction." "Someone smaller," Olivia translated, understanding immediately. "Someone who's done the impossible before," Reeves corrected. "Size is a factor, yes, but it's your specific expertise and proven track record that make you the right person for this mission." Olivia turned back to the display, studying the route between the cave system and the extraction point. 2 kilometers of the most challenging terrain imaginable, with wounded operators who might outweigh her by 80 to 100 pounds each. At 14,000 feet elevation, where the air contained barely 60% of the oxygen available at sea level, with a storm approaching that would make the already treacherous route potentially lethal. By any rational assessment, the mission was beyond the capabilities of a single individual, regardless of their size or skill set. And yet, "I'll need specialized equipment," Olivia said, her decision made. and I want Ramirez as my partner." All eyes in the room turned to her with varying degrees of surprise. "Ramirez?" Commander Wilson asked. "The trainee who graduated from your program 6 months ago?" "She's not a trainee anymore. She's a qualified combat medic with exceptional extraction capabilities." Olivia met Wilson's skeptical gaze without flinching. "She's also 5 feet tall and weighs 110 pounds. If I'm right about the terrain challenges, her size will be an advantage, not a limitation." General Matthews looked to Reeves. "Your assessment, Captain." Reeves studied Olivia for a long moment before responding. "If Donovan thinks Ramirez is the right choice, then Ramirez is the right choice. I've learned not to question her judgment when it comes to assessing capabilities." 12 hours later, Olivia and Ramirez were aboard a C-17 transport aircraft, reviewing equipment and finalizing their extraction plan. The specialized gear Olivia had requested included modified harnesses designed to distribute weight more efficiently across their frames, lightweight tactical medical kits, and specialized mountain equipment adapted for their specific needs. "Senior Chief," Ramirez said quietly as they prepared their gear for high-altitude conditions. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why me?" "There are more experienced medics available." Olivia paused in her equipment check to give Ramirez her full attention. "Because you understand something most operators never learn." "What's that?" "That physical strength is only part of the equation. Technique, leverage, and mental fortitude matter more than raw power." Olivia secured a final strap on her modified harness. "And because I've seen what you can do when everyone else thinks it's impossible." Ramirez nodded, absorbing this with the serious consideration it deserved. "Do you think we can do this?" 6 operators, 2 kilometers of extreme terrain, limited time window. "I think we're going to find out what we're really capable of," Olivia replied honestly. "And I think that's exactly why we're here." The insertion occurred just before dawn, a halo jump from 30,000 feet that deposited them at the edge of the valley, still 5 kilometers from the stranded operators. Moving through the rugged terrain with full gear required every ounce of their training and experience, but their smaller frames allowed them to navigate narrow passages that would have been challenging for larger operators. They reached the cave system as the sun was setting, finding the 6 operators in conditions worse than the briefing had indicated. The 2 critically wounded SEALs had developed complications, one with a tension pneumothorax that required immediate intervention, the other with a femoral fracture that had been improperly splinted and now threatened his circulatory system. "Sitrep?" Olivia asked Lieutenant Commander Fraser, the only unwounded operator and current team leader. "Not good," Fraser replied, his face haggard from 3 days of continuous vigilance. "Peterson and Alvarez are critical. Hernandez, Morgan. And I can move under our own power, but slowly. Jensen has a spinal injury we've been stabilizing. He needs a proper evacuation stretcher." Olivia and Ramirez worked through the night, stabilizing the wounded and preparing them for movement. The most critical decision involved Jensen's spinal injury. The narrow mountain paths would make it impossible to carry him on a traditional stretcher. "We'll need to improvise," Olivia told Ramirez as they assessed the situation. "A modified vertical carry using the harness system I designed." "That's never been tested with spinal injuries," Ramirez pointed out. "It's tested now," Olivia replied. "The alternative is leaving him here." By first light, they were ready to move. The extraction plan called for Olivia and Ramirez to each carry 1 critical casualty, while the 3 mobile operators would make their way under their own power, supporting each other as needed. They would need to reach the extraction point within 18 hours before the incoming storm made helicopter operations impossible. The first kilometer tested every aspect of their training and preparation. The narrow mountain paths required precise foot placement, with sheer drops of hundreds of feet punishing any mistake. Carrying Peterson on her specially designed harness, Olivia led the way. identifying the safest route and establishing anchors at particularly treacherous sections. Behind her, Ramirez followed with Jensen secured in the modified vertical carry system, his spinal column stabilized as effectively as possible under the circumstances. The young medic moved with a confidence that belied her 6 months of field experience, her small frame navigating obstacles that would have stopped larger operators in their tracks. 4 hours into the extraction, they encountered their first major obstacle, a section of path that had collapsed, leaving a 6-foot gap with nothing but a 1,000-foot drop below. The 3 mobile operators could potentially jump across, but for Olivia and Ramirez carrying wounded personnel, the gap presented a seemingly insurmountable challenge. Options? Fraser asked, surveying the collapsed section with growing concern. Olivia studied the gap, then the surrounding terrain. "We go around." "There is no around," Fraser pointed out. "It's straight down on both sides." "There's always another way," Olivia replied, already removing her pack to access specialized climbing gear. "We create our own path." Using techniques she had developed during mountain rescue training, Olivia established an improvised traversal system, a series of anchors and tension lines that would allow them to circumvent the gap by moving laterally across the cliff face before rejoining the path 15 meters ahead. "This is insane," Fraser muttered as he watched Olivia test the first anchor. "This would be challenging for experienced climbers without casualties to transport." "Good thing we're not doing it for the challenge then," Olivia replied her focus unwavering as she completed the rigging. "We're doing it because it's necessary." The traversal took nearly 2 hours, with each wounded operator carefully secured and moved across the improvised system. When Peterson, Olivia's casualty, was safely across, she returned to help Ramirez with Jensen's more complicated transfer, the 2 small-framed medics working in perfect coordination to keep his spine stabilized throughout the precarious movement. By mid-afternoon, they had covered just over half the distance to the extraction point. The thinning air at 14,000 feet was taking its toll, making each step require twice the effort it would at sea level. Olivia and Ramirez rotated casualties to distribute the physical burden, but the cumulative effect of hours carrying wounded operators through extreme terrain was becoming evident in their increasingly labored breathing and slowing pace. "We need to rest," Fraser suggested during a brief water break. "You two have been carrying twice your body weight for 8 hours straight." "No time," Olivia replied, checking Peterson's vital signs before readjusting her harness. "Storm's coming in faster than predicted. If we don't reach the extraction point within 6 hours, we're all spending the night on this mountain." As if to emphasize her point, the wind picked up, bringing with it the first hints of the approaching storm system. Temperature was already dropping, and in the distance, dark clouds were building over the higher peaks. "How much farther?" Ramirez asked, her voice steady despite the evident fatigue in her posture. "Just under a kilometer," Olivia replied. "But it's the hardest section yet." She wasn't exaggerating. The final approach to the extraction point involved a series of switchbacks up an increasingly steep incline, with sections where the path narrowed to barely 18 inches wide. Under normal circumstances, this would be challenging enough. Carrying wounded operators as the weather deteriorated around them elevated the challenge to something approaching impossible. But as Olivia had learned years earlier, impossible was often just a limitation accepted from others rather than a true assessment of capabilities. "One step at a time," she told Ramirez as they prepared to continue. "Focus on the next foothold, not the entire mountain." The next 3 hours became an exercise in pure determination. Every muscle in Olivia's body screamed for relief as she navigated the treacherous path with Peterson secured to her frame. The wind had strengthened to the point where it occasionally threatened to push them off balance, a potentially fatal development given the sheer drops on either side. Behind her, Ramirez was showing signs of extreme fatigue, her movements becoming increasingly mechanical as she forced her body to continue beyond its normal limits. But she never stopped, never complained, never suggested that what they were attempting might be beyond their capabilities. 3/4 of the way up the final incline, disaster struck. Jensen's condition suddenly deteriorated, his blood pressure dropping dangerously as the strain of the improvised vertical carry aggravated his spinal injury. Ramirez called an immediate halt, administering emergency treatment while Olivia secured their position on the narrowing path. "He's not going to make it if we keep moving him like this," Ramirez reported, her medical assessment brutally honest. "Despite the implications, the vertical pressure is compromising his spinal cord." Olivia surveyed their situation with the clinical detachment that had become her hallmark in crisis situations. They were still at least 300 meters from the extraction point, on a path too narrow for a traditional horizontal carry. The storm was less than 2 hours away, and they had a casualty who would die if they continued using their current method. "We modify," she decided, already removing specialized equipment from her pack. "I'll take both Peterson and Jensen." Fraser looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "That's over 400 pounds combined. Nobody can carry that kind of weight up this terrain, especially not someone my size." Olivia finished for him, her tone matter-of-fact rather than confrontational. "You're probably right, but we're going to find out." Using components from both her and Ramirez's harness systems, Olivia created a modified dual-carry apparatus that distributed the weight of both casualties across her entire frame. The design was untested, improvised from equipment never intended for this purpose, but the underlying principles were sound, the same leverage and body mechanics she had been perfecting since her earliest days on the farm. "This is suicide," Fraser muttered as he helped secure the casualties to Olivia's modified harness. "No," Olivia corrected him. "This is adaptation. This is refusing to accept that there are only bad options." With both Peterson and Jensen secured to her frame, one in front, one behind, Olivia took a moment to center herself. The combined weight was crushing, threatening to drive her to her knees before she'd taken a single step. But weight alone wasn't the primary challenge. It was maintaining perfect balance on a path barely wider than her shoulders, with a 1,000-foot drop waiting to punish any mistake. "Ramirez, you take point," Olivia instructed, her voice strained but steady. "Find the best footholds, establish anchors at any questionable sections. Fraser, you and your team follow behind me." "If I fall, you won't fall," Ramirez interrupted, her expression fierce with determination. "I won't let you." The final 300 meters became a blur of pain and focus so intense it approached meditation. Olivia's world narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the next moment of refusing to surrender to physical limitations. Each meter gained was a victory. Against nature, against conventional wisdom, against the very laws of physics that suggested what she was attempting should be impossible. Ramirez moved ahead with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat, identifying the safest route and sometimes literally carving footholds into the rocky surface with their limited tools. Behind Olivia, Fraser and his mobile team maintained a careful distance, ready to intervene if the impossible finally proved to be just that. When they crested the final ridge and the extraction point came into view, the helicopter was already there, rotors turning as the pilots watched the storm front approaching. From the west, the crew chief spotted them and immediately dispatched a medical team to assist with the final approach. "We've got you," a pararescue jumper called as he reached Olivia, moving to take some of the weight from her frame. "You can let go now." But Olivia shook her head, taking another step forward. "Not until we reach the helicopter. Not until they're safe." The final 50 meters were perhaps the most difficult of all, not because the terrain was particularly challenging, but because Olivia's body, having pushed beyond every conceivable limit for hours, was beginning to shut down. Each step required a conscious override of physical systems begging for relief, a mental discipline that transcended normal human endurance. When she finally reached the helicopter and medical personnel carefully removed Peterson and Jensen from her improvised carrying system, Olivia dropped to her knees, her legs simply refusing to support her any longer. Beside her, Ramirez collapsed as well, the two small-framed medics having accomplished what an entire QRF team might have considered beyond their capabilities. "Get them aboard," the crew chief shouted over the increasing wind. "Storm's going to hit any minute." As medical personnel lifted Olivia onto the helicopter, she caught a glimpse of Fraser's face, the skeptical team leader, who had questioned whether someone her size could possibly execute this mission. His expression now held something beyond respect, something approaching awe. The debriefing occurred 3 days later, after Olivia and Ramirez had been cleared by medical personnel. The extreme exertion had resulted in muscle damage and systemic inflammation that required specialized treatment, but both were expected to make full recoveries. Captain Reeves led the session, with General Matthews and several other senior officers in attendance. The operational details were reviewed with clinical precision insertion methods, medical interventions, extraction techniques, but it was the final phase of the mission that commanded the most attention. "To be clear," General Matthews said, reviewing the mission logs, "when faced with a casualty who could no longer be transported using standard methods, you improvised a dual carry system and personally transported 2 wounded operators with a combined weight of approximately 430 pounds, over 300 meters of extreme mountain terrain." "That's correct, sir," Olivia confirmed. "At 14,000 feet elevation, where oxygen levels are barely 60% of sea level." "Yes, sir." While a storm was approaching and standard evacuation protocols would have suggested leaving at least 1 casualty behind, leaving someone behind wasn't an option, sir. General Matthews set down the mission log and leaned forward. "Senior Chief Donovan, I've been in special operations for over 30 years. I've seen operators accomplish extraordinary things under impossible conditions. But what you and Petty Officer Ramirez achieved on that mountain defies conventional understanding of human capabilities." "With respect, sir," Olivia replied, "I think it defies conventional limitations, not capabilities. There's a difference." The mission resulted in commendations for both Olivia and Ramirez, but more significantly, it prompted a re-evaluation of physical standards and extraction protocols throughout special operations. The techniques Olivia had developed focusing on leverage, body mechanics, and adapted equipment rather than raw physical strength were incorporated into training programs across multiple branches. 6 months later, Olivia was promoted to Master Chief and given command of a specialized training unit focused specifically on unconventional extraction techniques. The program became known informally as Donovan's Impossibles, a small, elite cadre of operators selected not for their physical size or conventional strength, but for their problem-solving abilities and refusal to accept standard limitations. Ramirez became her second in command, bringing her own innovations to the program while continuing to shatter expectations about what someone her size could accomplish. Together, they transformed how special operations approached casualty evacuation in extreme environments, saving countless lives by proving that the right technique could overcome seemingly insurmountable physical challenges. On the anniversary of the Hindu Kush extraction, Captain Reeves visited the training facility to observe the newest class of Impossibles as they practiced specialized techniques on the program's custom-built obstacle course. "You've built something remarkable here, Master Chief," Reeves observed as they watched a 5'4" operator successfully extract a 200-pound dummy from a confined space that would have been inaccessible to someone larger. "Changed the entire paradigm of what we consider possible in the field." "Just adapting to reality, sir," Olivia replied. The battlefield doesn't care about our preconceptions or physical ideals. It only cares about results. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. You know, when I first saw you at Coronado all those years ago, I thought you were in the wrong place. Thought I was doing you a favor by trying to push you out before you got yourself or someone else killed. I remember. I've never been happier to be proven wrong. Reeves gestured toward the training course where operators of various sizes were demonstrating extraction techniques that would have been considered impossible just a few years earlier. This is your legacy, Donovan. Not just the lives you personally saved, but all the lives that will be saved because you refused to accept that your size was a limitation rather than an advantage. Olivia watched as Ramirez demonstrated a new harness system she had designed specifically for smaller operators, enabling them to leverage their lower center of gravity for increased stability on challenging terrain. The most dangerous limitations aren't physical, she observed. They're the ones we accept without question because someone else told us they were true. Years later, when Olivia finally retired from active service, her career became required. Study at military academies and special operations training facilities worldwide. The technique she had pioneered had revolutionized casualty evacuation protocols, while her leadership had created a generation of operators who measured capability by results rather than appearance. But perhaps her most enduring legacy was captured in the unofficial motto of the training program she had established, words now emblazoned above the entrance to the facility that still bore her name. The only impossible extraction is the one you don't attempt. In the end, the 5'2" farm girl from Montana had proven that being underestimated wasn't just a challenge to overcome, it was a tactical advantage that, when properly leveraged, could accomplish what others considered impossible. Not through extraordinary strength, but through the extraordinary refusal to accept that strength comes in only one form. Some battles are won with overwhelming force. Others are won with perfect technique, unwavering determination, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that your greatest perceived weakness might actually be your greatest hidden strength, one extraction at a time. The legacy of Master Chief Olivia Donovan continued to grow long after her retirement from active duty. What had begun as one small woman's refusal to accept artificial limitations had blossomed into a movement that transformed how the entire special operations community approached physical capabilities and mission parameters. Her story became more than just a military legend. It evolved into a philosophy that transcended the battlefield and inspired people from all walks of life. 10 years after establishing the specialized training program that revolutionized combat extraction techniques, Olivia found herself standing before a very different audience. The TEDx stage felt strange compared to the training ground she was accustomed to, but the message she carried remained unchanged. The most dangerous enemy we face isn't external, she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark. It's the voice that tells us something is impossible before we've even tried. The audience, a mixture of military personnel, medical professionals, athletes, and ordinary citizens seeking inspiration, leaned forward as Olivia shared the story of how a 5'2" farm girl from Montana ended up carrying 5 wounded Navy SEALs to safety through hostile territory. People often ask me about that day in Syria, she continued. They want to know what superhuman strength allowed me to accomplish what I did. The truth disappoints them. There was nothing superhuman about it. I simply refused to accept that my physical size determined my capabilities. As she spoke, images appeared on the screen behind her, not of her military accomplishments, but of the techniques she had developed, the specialized equipment she had designed, and the generations of operators she had trained to look beyond conventional limitations. What we call impossible is often just unfamiliar, Olivia explained. We've been conditioned to believe that certain tasks require specific physical attributes, height, weight, muscle mass. But what if those beliefs themselves are the primary obstacle? What if our preconceptions about capability are more limiting than any physical reality? The presentation culminated with footage that had never before been shown publicly, excerpts from training videos showing operators of various sizes successfully executing extraction techniques that defied conventional wisdom about strength requirements. Small-framed individuals moving casualties twice their weight through confined spaces that larger rescuers couldn't access. Innovative harness systems that distributed weight across the entire body rather than relying on upper body strength alone. The techniques you're seeing weren't developed to overcome physical limitations, Olivia emphasized. They were developed to leverage physical realities. My smaller frame wasn't a disadvantage, it allowed me to access spaces others couldn't. My lower center of gravity provided stability on challenging terrain. What others saw as weaknesses, I recognized as potential strengths. The standing ovation that followed her presentation lasted nearly 5 minutes. But it was the quiet conversations afterward that truly demonstrated the impact of Olivia's message. Paramedics discussing how her techniques could revolutionize civilian rescue operations. Coaches rethinking their assumptions about athlete potential. Ordinary people reconsidering the limitations they had accepted about their own capabilities. Among those waiting to speak with Olivia after the presentation was a young woman in a wheelchair, her athletic build suggesting she had not always been mobility impaired. Master Chief Donovan, she introduced herself as Emma Carter, former Army Ranger, injured 3 years ago during a training accident. Your presentation, it's changed how I'm thinking about my recovery. Olivia sat down beside her, recognizing the look of someone reassessing possibilities. How so? I've been focused on what I can't do anymore, Emma explained. Trying to get back to how things were before. But listening to you talk about leveraging reality rather than fighting it, it made me realize I'd been asking the wrong questions. Instead of lamenting what I've lost, I should be discovering what new capabilities I might have. This conversation marked the beginning of the next chapter in Olivia's journey. Within 6 months, she had established the Donovan Adaptive Techniques Foundation, an organization dedicated to translating the principles she had developed in combat medicine to civilian applications, particularly for individuals with physical disabilities or non-traditional body types. Working alongside physical therapists, engineers, and individuals with various physical challenges, Olivia applied the same problem-solving approach that had allowed her to carry wounded SEALs to safety. The foundation developed specialized equipment and innovative techniques that focused on what people could do rather than what conventional wisdom said they couldn't. Emma Carter became the foundation's first official success story. Using modified versions of the harness systems Olivia had developed for combat extractions, Emma discovered she could leverage her upper body strength to accomplish tasks that had previously seemed impossible from her wheelchair. There's another way, she said, her voice weak but determined, the Norton Couloir. It's steeper but protected from the wind and appears untouched by either avalanche. Olivia studied the route. Ramirez indicated a narrow snow-filled gully, cutting between imposing rock faces. Traditional rescue wisdom would immediately reject such a route for casualty evacuation. The steep angle and confined space would make conventional carrying methods impossible. But Olivia Donovan had built her entire career on rejecting conventional limitations. The couloir gives us a natural braking system, she observed, already mentally adapting their equipment for the new route. We can use the confined space to our advantage. Let the wall support part of the load while we control the descent rate. That route has never been used for rescue operations, Martinez pointed out. It's too steep, too narrow. Which means it's perfect for us, Olivia replied. Our size becomes an advantage in that confined space, not a limitation. The descent through the Norton Couloir became a master class in adaptive techniques and innovative problem-solving. Using the narrow walls of the gully as natural braking surfaces, the team developed a controlled rappel system that allowed them to lower the injured climbers through sections that would have been impossible using traditional methods. Their smaller frames, once considered a disadvantage in rescue operations, proved invaluable in the confined space, allowing them to maneuver alongside the casualties to provide continuous medical care and monitoring throughout the descent. After 18 grueling hours of continuous operation, the team reached Camp 2 with all 9 surviving climbers. From there, a support team was able to continue the evacuation to base camp, where medical evacuation helicopters waited to transport the injured to hospitals in Kathmandu. As Ramirez was being prepared for helicopter transport, she grasped Olivia's hand. "You were right," she said, her voice stronger now that they had reached a more oxygen-rich elevation. "All those years ago, when you told me that limitations are mostly in our minds." "I had a good teacher myself," Olivia replied. "Sometimes we need someone to show us what's possible before we can believe it ourselves." The Everest rescue became international news, with media outlets around the world marveling at how a team led by a 58-year-old woman had accomplished what seasoned mountaineers and rescue professionals had deemed impossible. Experts analyzed the innovative techniques and specialized equipment the team had employed, recognizing that they represented a paradigm shift in high-altitude rescue operations. But for those who knew Olivia Donovan's history, the success was not surprising. It was merely the latest chapter in a lifetime of proving that conventional wisdom about physical capabilities often reflected artificial limitations rather than actual human potential. 6 months after the Everest rescue, Olivia stood in the East Room of the White House, receiving the Presidential Citizens Medal for her contributions to rescue methodology and adaptive techniques. The ceremony was attended by many whose lives she had touched over the decades, from former military colleagues to individuals who had discovered new capabilities through the Foundation's work. In the front row sat Sarah Ramirez, now recovered from her injuries and serving as the Foundation's Director of High-Altitude Operations. Beside her was Emma Carter, whose work with disabled veterans had transformed rehabilitation programs across the country. Captain Reeves, now retired Admiral Reeves, watched with evident pride as his former trainee received recognition for accomplishments that had begun with his brutal challenges at Coronado decades earlier. Master Chief Donovan's contributions extend far beyond her military service, the President noted during the presentation. She has fundamentally changed how we understand human capability, proving repeatedly that our perceived limitations often have more to do with our assumptions than with physical reality. After receiving the medal, Olivia was asked to say a few words. Standing at the podium, she surveyed the room filled with individuals who had each, in their own way, refused to accept conventional limitations on their potential. "Throughout my career, people have often described what I've accomplished as extraordinary," she began. "But I've always believed there was nothing extraordinary about it. What I did, what each of us can do, is simply refuse to accept that our capabilities are defined by others' expectations." She gestured toward Ramirez and the other Foundation members present. "The techniques we've developed aren't about overcoming physical limitations. They're about recognizing that those limitations are often artificial constructs, based on assumptions rather than realities. When we change our perspective, when we focus on leveraging our actual physical attributes rather than lamenting that they don't match some ideal, we discover capabilities beyond what conventional wisdom suggests is possible." As she concluded her remarks, Olivia shared the philosophy that had guided her from those early days at Coronado to the slopes of Everest. The question isn't whether something is possible or impossible. The question is whether we're willing to find another way when the conventional approach doesn't work for us. Being underestimated isn't a disadvantage unless we believe it is. When we refuse to accept others' limitations on our potential, we discover that what seemed impossible was merely waiting for someone to find a different approach. The legacy of Olivia Donovan continued to grow in the years that followed. The technique she had pioneered became standard curriculum in military and civilian rescue operations worldwide. The Foundation expanded its work to include adaptive approaches for everything from disaster response to space exploration. But perhaps her most enduring impact was on the countless individuals who, inspired by her example, refused to accept that their physical attributes determined what they could accomplish. On the 10th anniversary of the Everest rescue, a documentary filmmaker asked Olivia, now in her late 60s, but still actively involved in developing new techniques, what she considered her greatest achievement. She thought for a moment before responding, "Creating a world where being told something is impossible is no longer the end of the conversation, but the beginning." The filmmaker nodded, then asked the question everyone eventually asked. "And Syria, those 5 SEALs? Was that really as extraordinary as the stories suggest?" Olivia smiled slightly. "At the time, it seemed impossible, just like every other impossible thing I've done since. But that's the point, isn't it? Once you do the impossible, it's not impossible anymore. It's just something that hadn't been done yet." As the interview concluded, the filmmaker asked one final question. What would you say to someone who feels limited by their physical size or attributes? Someone who's been told they can't do something because they don't fit the expected profile? Olivia's response encapsulated the philosophy that had guided her remarkable life. "I'd tell them that being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you believe it is. I'd tell them that every physical attribute has potential advantages in the right context. But most importantly, I'd tell them that the most dangerous limitations aren't the ones imposed by physical reality. They're the ones we accept without question, because someone else told us they were true." The quiet farm girl from Montana had indeed come a long way from those early days at Coronado, when a drill instructor had questioned whether her small frame could ever carry a wounded warrior to safety. She had answered that question not with words but with actions that had transformed how the world understood human capability. Some battles are won with overwhelming force. Others are won with perfect technique, unwavering determination, and the revolutionary idea that our greatest perceived weaknesses might actually be our greatest hidden strengths, if only we have the courage to see them differently. One extraction, one innovation, one redefined impossible at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.